But anyway, this is checklist for township administrators and staff. We've got 3 dynamic speakers this afternoon. Well, 2, and no, I'm just kidding. Carrie Lynn, I think everybody knows Carrie Lynn. Pat Murphy, who is the township supervisor of Belvedere Township. And also our 3rd speaker is Paul Piak of Palatine Township. And I've got formal bios I could read on all of those, but as I told Carrie Lynn, half the session would be over if I talked about all their accomplishments. So with that, let me present Carrie Lynn to open the session.
Well, good afternoon. So we are excited to be here giving this presentation. And TOI actually came up with this topic for us this year because they are trying to have specific tracks for different township officials. And what we realized is that we never really talked about the day-to-day operations of the township. So how many of you are officially township administrators with that title in your township? Okay. Now, how many of you don't have that title, but you kind of perform that function as a staff member? Okay. How many of you are supervisors? Oh, there go my supervisors' jokes. Okay. How about,
all your jokes,
how about clerks? Okay. And then trustees? Wow, we really have a smattering of everybody here. All right, highway commissioners? One alone, you're outnumbered, pal. So we'll get you through it. And then assessors. Okay, anybody that I missed? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about really the day-to-day operations of the township. And I thought in preparing this that I wasn't going to go down in flames alone, so I've recruited. How do I even describe Pat Murphy? Patrick has a township up in Boone County, Belvedere Township, where he actually has a right-hand man, who's a lovely lady, who actually does kind of the day-to-day operations at his direction. So I thought that would give a good perspective for townships that don't really have administrators, how to interact with staff. And then Paul Piak is the administrator of Palatine Township. So he can kind of give you the administrator's perspective. But I see out here, we also have supervisors like Steve Simpson, who kind of run everything on their own without any staff, or we have Gene Dawson, who has minions working at his township. So I mean, I think we're going to have a good perspective and good dialogue. So if there's anything you have questions about, we go ahead and talk about that, or raise whatever questions you have. Now, I'm going to have to try to give a speech from a PowerPoint, which is right next to me. So Matt, if you can click on the next thing. All right, the first thing that you need to do if you are an administrator or a staff person that performs this function is know what your job is. Now, an unusual thing is that the Township Code actually doesn't define the office of Township Administrator. It doesn't create that position. So the job of a Township Administrator or a staff person performing administrative functions varies widely in Illinois among townships, because as you can imagine, if you're a township with 3 employees, what happens on a day-to-day basis as far as administration is a lot different than if you're a township with 50 employees. So find out what your township's expectations are, and since we have a lot of policymakers here, if you're interacting with staff or if you're growing and developing into that, one of the things you should do is make sure that you have a job description and that you clearly communicate things to your staff regarding the expectations. Everybody is supposed to have an organizational chart for each township under the Freedom of Information Act, but when I was doing research in preparation for this speech, I only found about 4 online. So I don't know if everyone secretly has organizational charts that just aren't online, or if you don't have them. So the first thing you have to note is have one, and you should put in there the relationship of the different staff. Like if you're assessor's staff, how do they interact with your township staff? And one of the reasons it's really clear to clarify all of this, one of the #1 frustrations that I hear from people in the administrative function in townships is that they don't understand exactly, one, are they supposed to be taking assignments from everyone? Can all of the township board members give assignments to the staff and administration? Or is there a chain of command? So that's the first challenge I hear, that things are not clearly defined. The second challenge that I hear sometimes is that the people in the administrative functions are asked to actually perform the duties of the elected officials. So you need to know who you report to, who's your direct supervisor. Is it actually the township supervisor? Is it the clerk? Is there someone else? And what are the board's expectations of you? What are you supposed to be doing? And what do you do when problems come up? Who are you supposed to go to resolve them? Or is your job to put out the problems as they come up, or to create the problems? That's kind of my job, but okay. Next. Let's see. Yeah, one of the things that I want to make sure everybody understands is that when it comes to a township administrator, that position, there's not a right or a wrong way to do it. The right way is whatever works in your township. So if you hear us saying something up here today that you don't relate to, it, or it doesn't just sound like it's going to work, don't go back and think you have to fix it if it ain't broken. So if things are working for you the way that they have them, that's fine. The only thing I want you to be cautious of is if you're requiring your staff members to actually do things that are your functions as elected officials. If you are an elected official, you can't delegate certain things. You actually have to perform them yourselves. Next. Now, one of the key things, and I would like everyone's on the panel, your perspective on this, is I think you have to understand as staff members who the personalities are that you work around. And generally, in most townships, the administrators, I think, work very closely with the supervisors. Has that been what your experience is? Mm-hmm. And then how did you find out, like, what, you've been in that position for a while under a couple different political administrations, how did you figure out who you're supposed to report to? And
well, I tried to make that clear when I first got in as far as who my boss was going to be, because I knew there was an elected, it's the first time I'd ever worked with a group of elected officials, and there was, what, 8 people on the board, and I couldn't have 8 bosses, because one's enough most of the time for everybody, me included. And so I just made it clear when I talked to the supervisor when I was hired that I knew that I reported to her and that she would funnel the board through her. And it worked out great, and the new supervisor's the same way. I report to her, and that's easily done. I mean, I talk to the other elected officials, and we don't tell them no on anything, but I mean, if it's something really difficult, then it goes through the supervisor, because I don't want to get involved in a push-pull between them using me as the leverage, you know.
And then Patrick, how do you decide what you're going to do or what you're going to have other people do?
Just depends on what mood I'm in.
The dartboard approach.
No. I was a trustee, and our beloved supervisor passed away, so I replaced him, and then I won the election. So I'm very fortunate. I moved into a situation where it had a little bit of experience, and we have a, whatever you want to call her, I call her my right, left arm. This lady's been there 10 years, and she's just absolutely remarkable. And but I also feel very good that I have a good relationship with the assessor and a really good relationship with the road commissioner. And sadly enough, whenever anyone calls about road issues, it always ends up coming to me. And I don't know if that has anything to do with my name or whatever, but I'm the one that goes out and talks to the people to try to help him find a solution. But it's all because we all appreciate each other, I think. And I respect them. I respect what their duties are. And the trustees, we all have our place. And seriously, it's very harmonious right now. And hopefully it'll always be that way. And it's just all about respect. But then the first thing I did was I've always got this, and you know, you got the calendar in there, so it's not that like I have to tell Terry or whatever. I know that she, just like me, always looks at this calendar of the particular months to see what should we do and what we shouldn't do. I spent a lot of time initially reading this, so that, you know, I don't want to step on someone else's toes. You know, like the assessor, once you give them a budget, they can do pretty much whatever, and the road commissioner for sure. And then, I mean, I know these are props, but these are the things that I spent a lot of time with the first year or so. And then this, turn to any page, ask me whatever paragraph, I've got it memorized, because Carrie Lynn did this. This might be the signed copy, I'm not sure. I didn't bring that because I thought somebody might want to take it. But all seriousness though, I look at all this stuff, And then we're fortunate enough to be able to have a good attorney that understands township law. We're the largest township where we're at, and we've gone through some turbulent times. The city wanted to do away with us because they want our money. Some people on the county wanted to do away with us because they want our money. Because we have money, because we manage it properly, our levy is low, and we've done a good job because everybody enjoys and likes what they're doing, and hopefully that will always continue. And I think just by showing respect and listening and wait until they leave the room to do what you want to do, so. Sorry, I didn't really mean that.
So, one of the key things, I think, for the staff is to know your supervisor's personality, because supervisors come in all shapes and sizes, and some of them are full-time, some of them are part-time, some of them really want to be on autopilot and have the staff handle as much as they can and remind them of deadlines, and others are a little more controlling and want to be more involved and only want their staff to do things when delegated. So it's really key that you understand that up front so that you're not either failing to perform something that is expected of you that you didn't know about, or stepping on someone's toes who's also working on the same thing as you. It's also, what I like to tell staff members is that you're stuck in the middle with the attorneys whenever it comes to different political seasons. So it's really key to understand, does your supervisor have the political support of the whole board or not? Or, you know, how does that come into play? Not because you should get in the middle of that, but because it's going to have an impact on how you work. If you get an assignment from the supervisor and you know that the township board votes down everything that the supervisor puts forth or something like that, then that might tell you how much time you're going to spend on a project or not, depending on what it is. Maybe you can suggest that it comes before the board for a vote, before a lot of action is taken. But understand that dynamic and try to operate within it, because you may get stuck in the middle of some uncomfortable situations. The other thing you need to understand is your relationship with the clerk. And the reason why I bring this up is I find that administrators and the clerks usually have a very close working relationship, but it's different than the relationship with the supervisor, who generally directs the role of the township administrator. A lot of times what I find is that a lot of the functions of the office of the clerk fall upon the administration and the staff. Again, it depends on the clerk, but I know a lot of administrators who, for example, are asked to actually type up the minutes, and then the clerk will review them. And I know in some circumstances the township administrators are upset about that because it takes them away from other functions that they need to be performing, and they're feeling like clerks should be kind of handling those. But those are issues you kind of just have to tackle head on head with the person who's holding that particular elected office. This is one of the areas, though, that I want to make sure that you watch out for, because clerks have the ability to hire deputy clerks if the township board permits them to do so, but the functions that they can delegate by law to deputy clerks are very limited. So it's not that a deputy clerk can just do everything that the clerk can do in the clerk's absence. So you need to make sure that you're aware of that. Sometimes the administrator is appointed, or a different staff member, to be a deputy clerk, and there's nothing wrong with that. But make sure that you're aware of what functions you can and cannot be performing are. Any insights on that issue?
Well, in our office, the clerk does all the minutes. She does her own thing. Terry may help her, I may help her, miscellaneous things, but she's part-time, I'm full-time. And she does all the minutes and gets all the recording equipment ready and records the tapes and stores the tape, excuse me. But no, it works well. And, and if need be, Terry can help her do something, because we're pretty flexible. But everyone, and it comes down to respect and showing appreciation for each person and buying them treats every now and then.
Yeah, in our township, the clerk takes care of handling all the minutes and everything, but she usually runs the drafts by me before they go to the full board. So she can get my perspective on something that maybe been said at the meeting that she didn't capture fully or whatever. Even though it's recorded, it's just another person's in the room, and how how maybe that is perceived. And so we'll finesse the minutes a little bit before they go to the board, and then they have a chance to, hear them or see them as well.
The other thing that you should clearly understand is what is the protocol for interacting with your board. If there's something going on, does your supervisor want everything channeled through the supervisor and then it goes to the board? Or are you free to speak with other people that are having other issues? And does a trustee have the ability to call you up and assign you something? Can the highway commissioner do that? Those are the things that just have to be clear. Again, there's no right or wrong, but what I find is that people are very frustrated in that position if it's not clear. All right. The other thing is understand your relationship to other staff. How many employees are in Palatine Township?
In the township office, 22.
And so you're pretty much responsible on a day-to-day basis for assigning what they do?
Yeah, then we have department heads that are direct reports, but then they each have, 2 or 3 or whatever people. They could be a single person that handles the position, but it's like 5 direct reports and then their staffs.
And then the staff for the assessor and the highway commissioner, they report to the individual elected officials, or they also report to you?
Yeah, yes, the road district's in a different building, so the superintendent is my counterpart there, takes care of everything with them. We have a good working relationship, so it works all right. It works out fine because they help me with projects that I'm not skilled in, construction and things like that, and then we help them with operations issues. And for the assessor's office, it's really kind of a dotted line because we help them where needed, for administrative operations, computer things, but they're autonomous in regards to reporting to me for anything because they do work directly for the assessor.
So how many of you are in townships with more than 5 employees? Okay, so we just have a couple there. And how many of you have more than 10 employees? More than 15? Oh my goodness. Okay, we have some big townships here then. How many of you have unions? Any of you? Okay, wow, I'm surprised about that. That's kind of uncommon in the township arena. So Patrick, what is your interaction with the staff? Do you supervise all of the staff or?
I have 2 full-time persons that work with me. The road commissioner doesn't have anyone other than his 4 employees. And then he comes to me and or Terry, and I always seem to know. I don't demand it, but I always like to know what's going on, so I'm not surprised. And then our assessor has 4 employees, which are unionized. And she comes to me if she's got issues. The big thing, Lee, is that I manage the building that we're in, and that was an issue for someone a few years ago, but now we got that worked out because the supervisor technically is the manager of the building, so I'm responsible for, well, everything, maintenance-wise and scheduling. And our building is used probably 120 times a year by other agencies, and I try to limit it to a semblance of taxing bodies. Like we got I just forgot their name, the dog lovers. It's a group of people that are into, they just passed a referendum, by the way, so 70%. But, groups like that, and then CERT, Citizens Emergency Response, they meet there, the sheriff's, the auxiliary. So I manage that, and but it works out pretty well, because like I said, we all get around, but I don't have 22 or 50. Or
So from your perspective then, what makes a good staff member to you?
just someone that does their job and asks questions and doesn't make any really assumptions. And I'm not afraid. It's just that where I'm at and maybe where you guys are at is different, but if something goes wrong, it's always me. Or I have to answer to it. And all I ask is that you let me know what's going on, and I'll protect you or best I can, defend you, but I just don't want to be surprised.
Well, except having worked so closely with you, I think if something is going wrong, it usually is you. No. Just kidding.
And you know what? Matt?
Did you want to say something?
No, he said it was all on him, and I said, well, that's kind of what we do as administrators.
Oh, yes, the role of
You guys
scapegoat
agree, yeah.
is kind of assigned throughout the different levels of township government. All right, next here. Okay, and go on. Oh, so here's a question. How do you survive and thrive in an environment where you have different political factions sometimes?
Well, if there are things that come up that are political, I just tell them that, that's not our position at the township as employees, and we won't be involved in it. So, and it doesn't come up. I mean, I've never in the 5 years I've been there had somebody come to me and say, I need you to do this, and it being a political thing. It's just if things are out there in the community, and, I say, well, you know what, we're not gonna get involved in it because we're apolitical, and, and the supervisors have always said, you're right, we're not going to get involved in it. So we stay away from, those types of things.
So I'm going to talk in a moment about political activities as it relates to the township, because there's some things we need to address with that. But even not working on campaign issues and things like that, what do you do when you see different dynamics on the board? Like, not a partisan political thing, but that people are supporting something on that might be 3-2 vote. Have you ever had a chance to observe issues like that?
Yes.
In other townships around you, but not on your board?
Oh, I didn't say that at first. Yeah, I mean, sure, the township board argues, and, everybody's board probably does, but they usually work it out. I mean, there's been some things that they haven't, but from my perspective, maybe it didn't go the way that I would have liked it to go, or it did, opposite of the other people. But, for the most part, we really haven't had any huge things that the township board can't get around. It usually just takes a while to work through it, and it's a lot of discussion. And recently, with the new supervisor, she instituted a committee meeting in the whole once a month, where we didn't have that before. So that's where they can get together and hash out things and argue about things and prolong it as long as they want prior to the board meeting. And so a lot of those nuances are worked out by the time it gets on the agenda. Then they kind of decide what it is, and they can finally, have a final discussion, and it's over with. So those types of issues that are difficult to begin with are worked out usually at a committee meeting whole, and if it doesn't, then it sometimes gets postponed for a month or two, until they can come to some kind of conclusion.
Well, that's a good way to handle it. And I mean, all votes don't have to be unanimous as long as the township's moving forward. Okay. So one of the things we thought would be helpful to talk about on checklists is what should township staff be doing at different times. Now, I know both of you have independently told me that really the calendar and the perspective. Are you all familiar with the calendar and the perspective? We've attached a sample of that. And by the way, I also did attach a sample of a job description for an administrator to the materials, in case any of you kind of formalize that position within your staff. So just how do you remember all of the different deadlines and keeping up with whatever you're supposed to be doing?
I use the perspective, but I also use the top one there says see attached sample. We have one of those for every month. I don't know if it's in the handout, I presume it is. Mm-hmm. And that was just the month of January, and I picked that one because it had a lot of stuff going on with it. So you can see what it is we look at and how much in advance we look at it. And so we have that for 12 months of the year for everything that's required, and it especially has dates in there as far as when things have to be to the county, when things have to be brought up before the board for a vote in time to get to the county for the filing deadline, et cetera. That's a big thing. And the other thing I live by is Outlook calendar. I mean, I put everything on there. If there's a meeting of any sort or whatever, I put it on there, put it at 3 days ahead of time, 3 weeks ahead of time, an hour ahead of time, whatever. It rules my life in regards to everything that's going on, because you can't keep all of that in your head. I mean, with 22 people and 5 of them as direct reports, I know a lot of you have more than that, but that plus all the things that it's not sexist, but I'm the only man in the building except for a part-time bus driver and a part-time maintenance man. And so anything that's like somebody comes to the counter and needs some physical work done, it's like, oh, they come get the administrator, so I have to go help them get their food donations out of their car or whatever else has to be done. So I'm Johnny on the spot. So it's a hands-on position.
Well, that's good.
Do it.
You can give them the male perspective, and the women can give you the correct perspective. Yeah, go from there.
Yeah, the correct perspective. Go find the male to do it.
Wait, there are more women in here, right? I should have counted before I said that. And Patrick, how do you keep up with any other things on keeping up with? Yeah, so you rely pretty extensively on her.
No, but you know what? I do have a pretty good idea what's going on, because I also use Outlook, and I put stuff ahead of time, and sometimes she gets a little bogged down because she's also our bookkeeper, and we write a lot of checks. I joke with a couple other townships that I sign more checks on a Wednesday after a meeting you guys do in 2 months, because we just are bigger. But like I said, we follow that guideline, and Terry's always got the perspective calendar open, and we do that also for the road commissioner. And like I said, we have a good working relationship, and it's just, you know, after a while, you kind of know stuff that you have to get done, you know, and it seems to work pretty simply, or efficiently, I guess, better word.
Now, Steve, I know you're in a really small township. How do you juggle your deadlines and everything?
The perspective calendar.
Yeah, okay.
You know, monthly, we take it to our monthly board meeting and talk about what's coming up over the next couple of months, so.
And that function really falls on you as supervisor in that
Sure,
instance.
all happens, but yeah.
Can I interject something there? In the township perspective calendar, it's more difficult for our township to follow that because we're not on the same fiscal calendar as that is. It's, I think, April to March, or March to February. So every time I look at that, I got to back it back a month, and the road district's on the same April to March. So I've got 2 fiscals in my head besides looking at that. So you got to kind of take that with perspective. I don't know if anybody else has that same wacky thing. Yeah.
And then Jean, in a larger township, how do you juggle all the day-to-day things you're bombarded with?
Foremost, that's a misnomer.
Really?
Yes, we are probably like he is. I have only one person.
Oh, why do I keep thinking your population's large?
It's a mistake.
He walks smart.
That could be.
But no, technically, in my township, not unlike what Paul was talking about, I'm the only male amongst 4 females, 2 of which are office folks. But one's the deputy assessor, the other person is the one that works with me in the supervisor's office. So when it comes to vacations, for example, Barbara goes on vacation, I do everything that she does, literally, including the food pantry. And we have a food pantry, believe it or not, with only the 2 of us. So we pretty much operate well, I will put it that way. In the assessor's office, we have a budget whereby the assessor's office is included in our budget. So when we buy supplies, it's for everybody. But we have a good communication network. I don't know where you got the size part. But, again, it's just the 2 of us in the supervisor's office and 2 people in the assessor's office.
Actually, that's an important point that I wanted to put in here and didn't remember to do that. One of the things that is very important is cross-training your employees to make sure that if you do have someone who's gone or someone who goes on a maternity leave or is just off for a couple days, that other people can step up and do payroll and life can kind of go on. So if you're not doing cross-training, you should do that.
Well, I've been fortunate enough, some people may not say so, but I was the assessor for 10 years before I became the supervisor. And sometimes in the assessor's office, there may be some questions from people that we're able to help them with. Not that we impose on the assessor's office, we don't. But when situations are such where the deputy assessor is the only one there and we have appeals, there are times when we have to assist a little bit. So, yeah, you're absolutely right on the money. Cross-training is absolutely essential. No matter what size, it's essential.
That's true.
Can I add to that right there? This Terry that I'm talking about, and I cannot say enough about her. A few weeks ago, her husband was in an unfortunate accident where he died. And here again, I mean, they were just the epitome of a good wife, a good mother, grandmother. And he was the greatest guy. I always used to tease him he should run for sheriff because he's the nicest, whatever. Anyway, so that made me really realize, had made me think, because I'm very fortunate that Terry is so dedicated and so good that I had to go back to what I kind of taught myself when I became supervisor, and I gotta admit I got a little nervous because if I had to start doing all of the payroll and all this, because my other gal is just learning, and we're trying to get her trained to do a lot of stuff, but she's not quite there yet. So I'm thinking, oh man, you know, I mean, I don't care how big you are, when those people want their paychecks, damn man, you gotta get them out. So we were able to work through it, but it's made me realize that, one, I'm going to do some more stuff just to keep myself fresh, and then get Kathy, because that cross-training is so important, because you never know when something's gonna happen, and
May I add to that? Certainly not the circumstance you had, but the lady person that works with me had a medical situation, was out 3 weeks. So I was doing the whole show for 3 weeks. So cross-training is, and some of the things that she does, obviously if I didn't pay attention, I wouldn't be able to do. So that's why we do what we do.
So really, whatever office you hold in a township or whatever position you hold, think about who would perform your functions if you weren't there. And if you don't right now have a backup system, think about that. And also think about it in relation to the people that you rely on. All right, next I wanted to shift and talk about checklists related to potential things that can get you in trouble at a township. And we have to try to limit this to the half hour we have left. But one of them that we already touched on briefly is political activities. And I bring this up because I find that this comes into play in small townships and large townships, and sometimes more so in the smaller ones, where everybody is involved in election matters and everybody's involved in the township, and the next thing you know, you're printing up political brochures on the township copier and things like that, just because that's how everyone has always done it. So be cognizant that you can't be involved in political activities on compensated time. Your staff can't. Now, when it comes to being an elected official, usually you get a stipend or you have an annual salary, and there's no real clear delineation as to what constitutes your official compensated time. So you have a little more flexibility. Just be careful that you're not engaging in political activities using anything paid for by the taxpayers. That's probably the clearest and best way to think of it. Now, in the handout, I've actually gone through the different parameters of what is defined to be prohibited political activity. And I don't think we have to spend a lot of time on it. I just wanted to kind of call that to your attention because this is one of those areas of law which seems pretty basic, but the next thing you know, if you have an employee on vacation and vacation is paid time, does that mean compensated time? And the answer is no. If they're off actually on time that's a benefit time like that, that's not like on the clock time. So sometimes what you will see in larger public bodies is that they will have their regular governmental office set up, and it's with all the same people who are involved in their political activities, but they have a separate campaign headquarters and a separate phone line that's dedicated for political activities, not paid for by the taxing body. It would be paid for instead by the Political Action Committee. So just watch out for that as we head into another round of elections, although townships are off the hook for a couple more years, at least, with respect to an election cycle. So, yes, sir.
Just want to add, watch computers.
Yes, watch.
You really get in trouble with political things on computers and out of a public office.
That's an excellent point. And in fact, we were involved in a referendum battle with the village this last time around, and one of the trustees of the village was sending out political material on the governmental computer. I mean, it's really an interesting issue because technically if the Constitution says that you can't use public funds for a private purpose, but this is a political referendum in your community and you're on an email provider like Gmail that's free, are you still engaging in a prohibited political activity? In that particular instance, we came down on the fact that you should not be engaging in advocacy using anything of the governmental property just to avoid the appearance of that. But I'm glad you raised that because that is something you should be sensitive to.
When Lisa Madigan's office comes in, they start pulling computers and taking out the information, and you know it's there whether you think you've erased it or not.
Yeah, that's true. I'm still always surprised that some people in this day and age think that you can actually delete a file from something.
You can't.
But She is why he's my favorite and best client.
We're going to help her under retirement.
Hey, but also though, that, I mean, as far as checklists, that's a good thing to put, a checklist to have an IT policy about your use. I know there's another session at this conference on the ingredients of that, but you should have a policy that applies both to your public officials and also to your staff, so they know what they can use their public devices for, but they also really have to be cognizant of using their private devices for public purposes, because that may expand the jurisdiction of Lisa Madigan when she shows up also. All right. One of the functions that you're going to run into is that you have to administer or handle personnel policies and employment laws. Now, one of my clients just this morning, a little township, the supervisor sent me a personnel policy and said, we updated this in 1990. Do you think we need to look at it again? Well, employment laws change very frequently. I mean, just think of all the things you've heard about in the news recently. Concealed carry. Do you know how that impacts your township? Do you have policies in place for that? How about Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act? There are some laws that kind of change things globally. Now, technically, you don't need to have a personnel policy in effect unless you have more than 5 employees. For those of you who don't, if you're just 1 or 2 people, you don't really need it. But if you have any employees, to protect yourselves, you should have some policies regarding vacation, regarding sick time. Because if you don't have them, you can get in trouble. If you have them, you can be very flexible with them. So think about having them if you have any employees at all, even if you're not at the 5-person threshold. Yes?
Do temporary employees or part-time employees count as an employee when you're counting those numbers up?
Oh my goodness, this is a disastrous question. Do temporary employees or part-time employees count as employees? Well, it really kind of depends on the particular law you're talking about. But I would say if you have employees occasionally, there's a difference between part-time and temporary. You should have something that specifies what they are. First of all, you might have a problem when it comes to unemployment compensation and the Department of Employment Security if you haven't characterized them as one or another, and you might be responsible for paying the benefits you don't think you do. But second of all, and the reason why I say oh no to that question is under the Affordable Care Act, there's like full-time equivalents that part-time employees can fall into depending on how often you use them and the number of hours per week. So I would say the safest thing always is to have a policy and to have something written. Now, in townships, that always raises the issue too that the assessor's office could have a different personnel policy manual than your highway commissioner, who could have a different personnel policy than the township. The best practice, from my perspective, is when you have consistent policies among all the elected officials. Sometimes, unfortunately, that's just not possible. And then you have to respect the position of the other office holders when it comes to that. But the best thing is to have the policies be consistent. Employment laws change all the time, though. So make sure you regularly update them. Sexual harassment, one of the things you're required to have is a sexual harassment policy, and everybody knew that when that law first came out, but you need to do regular supervisory training, and I don't know a lot of public bodies that are actually doing that. So kind of, if you haven't done that in a while, think about doing it again. Make sure you have a Family and Medical Leave Act policy, because a lot of times people don't think about that until they have a pregnant employee, and now the person's going to take off, and you need to establish the timelines for how you're counting that. So make sure you have a written policy on that. And then I just added those as illustrations of things that really have cropped up within the last year that we're now amending all of our clients' personnel policies to address concealed carry and the Affordable Care Act. How do the two of you keep up with changes in your employment policies?
We look at it on about every spring. We look at it because the assessor has theirs, the road district has theirs, and then myself and, well, with the 2 employees, we kind of follow what the assessor does because it's easier. And the only real difference is that the road commissioner has a couple different days off than the assessor's office does. And then that's, I think, primarily because of the winter months. He wants to be able to have more flexibility in the winter months because, you know, once the snow falls, then they're locked for the winter. So but it's worked out well, but we do sit down and go over it. And a couple things that, you know, I guess I never really gave a thought to was concealed carry. then I have a question, and maybe she can answer this for all of us right now. If I have an employee that's eligible for medical marijuana, do I have to make them go outside and stand 15 feet from the building?
Well, they shouldn't be actually doing this on the job
No,
unless
I
you,
mean, it's part of it's medically required, you know.
if it's medically,
They take pills at work, so.
you could probably have a designated location for that. See, Belvedere Township, paving the way for all Illinois townships. Excellent.
We have actually a policy committee at our township, and by coming to TOY or different seminars, when they find out about new things going on, then they incorporate that into the policy manual. And then our attorney looks at it and gives us updates. I think that when you guys looked at it a couple of years ago, Family Medical Leave Act, we added that in and a couple other things. But so the Concealed Carry and the Affordable Care Act and medical marijuana have just been put in recently as well. So we try to stay up to date with all that stuff. And you don't think it'll ever be used, but we've just had somebody take off from first time, I think, well, in the 5 years I've been there, Family Medical Leave Act, we had somebody off for 12 weeks. So we had to refer to the policy manual to see how we had to handle it to make sure that her rights and the township's rules were followed, and we just followed it to a T.
One thing to make note of, if you are one of the townships that raised your hand that you have unions, you can't just change your personnel policies as applied to union employees unless you negotiate that with them first. So add that to your list of things that the next time you have negotiations you have to talk to them about. Now, some of you may have negotiated something into your contracts that say you'll adhere to the personnel policy manuals, but be careful, because even if you have that language in Illinois, if you are doing anything that impacts the term or condition of employment related to a union employee, even if it's under the umbrella of a personnel policy, it could be found to be an unfair labor practice. So make sure that you communicate with, and if there are certain things unions won't really care about that much. If you're just changing the calculation on whether you're going to do rollback or calendar year forward for the Family and Medical Leave Act, they're not going to care about that unless they have an employee in that particular situation right now. So if you just need to clean up a personnel policies, add it to your list of things to negotiate. Okay, the Gift Ban Act. This is something that all elected officials should be aware of, all of your employees should be aware of, and as you hire new employees, they should be trained about the provisions. So I have put a summary sheet about the Gift Ban Act in here, and you can review that, but really it has caps as to what you as elected officials can accept. It also has caps as to what you as employees can accept from people who do business with the township, which is why I can't just give Patrick Murphy $100,000, even though I would really just love to do that. It's the gift ban. Well, there are exceptions for close personal friends, and those are all spelled out in the handout. But this is another session that we could probably just take a whole hour to talk about the ins and outs of the Gift Ban Act. And maybe I'll tell Tia why we should do that, because we haven't really done that since it first came out. And I think this is something that people get confused about a lot of the times. Next. Oh, one of the things that is a potential danger area is the fact that you all have access to sensitive and confidential information, and there are certain precautions that you have to be taking with respect to that. Now, as a highway commissioner, do you keep your personnel records in the road department, or do you keep those in with the township?
I have records for the drug testing in my office.
Okay, so you keep those. And the reason I ask is that this is another area where sometimes townships keep all their records in one location with the clerk or with the administrator, and sometimes the assessor keeps the assessors, and sometimes the highway commissioner keeps the road districts. Make sure that your personnel records are secured. And one of the things that we learned recently when the Social Security number law came into effect about 2 years ago, we were doing the training about how you have to keep Social Security numbers private, was that people were not securing information and were not keeping them locked up. And I remember one of our Park District clients told me that when he was like carrying resumes with him in his little golf cart, interviewing people in between doing his other functions, and you have to have respect for employee privacy. There are laws that protect it. There's the Social Social Security number one, you have to make sure that nobody has access to that except for very limited people, and that those are all secured and locked so that your custodians who come through at night don't have access to that. If you administer a health care plan, you have to watch out for the HIPAA requirements. You can't be telling people about other people's health conditions, which sounds pretty basic, but what I find, even from my law firm, we have probably about 80 employees, and if someone's off and they're sick, people usually want to know, is this person okay, or are they dying, and they don't want to know it because they're nosy. They want to know it because they care about their coworkers and they want to know if they can help or reach out, and I find that a lot with townships. Just the situation that happened with Terry being off with her husband. I mean, everyone kind of rallied and pulled together to get everything done. So it's kind of hard if you know there's a situation going on, but you can't talk about it. But that's exactly why I'm reminding you about it as a pitfall, because you can't disclose it. You can have the employee disclose it to other people if they want to, but you have to keep all of those kind of records and information safe. And most of you already know that if you have access to general assistance information, that's confidential, and even the supervisors can't release some of that information to the township board. Yes, sir.
Now that we have records, what do they say about record retention and how to dispose of them?
Well, you have to go through the local. Yeah.
That's this weekend.
Yeah. Well, the quickest, simplest answer to what you do with your records is, I mean, you have to get permission from the local records commission in order to dispose of them. And then, I mean, you can shred them or burn them or things like that. You can redact off of them the Social Security numbers. Not every little piece of information is private. The other thing is, what an employer has the ability to know on a public record, for example, my home address, my birthday, what exemptions I'm taking for my health insurance, things like that, even though it may otherwise be a public record, isn't something that can be disclosed to the public. So there's some information that you're still entitled to have as the employer, but the takeaway is just secure it if you can. Was there another question or comment? Yes?
Just a comment. Our township, the highway commissioner as well as the general town invested in a fire safe, locked safe, because the highway commissioner had titles and records of equipment that needed to be in a safe place, general assistance, employee records, and even our check system. So it was quite an investment, but it has paid off.
That sounds like a very secure way to do it. Otherwise, also just in basic file cabinets, just limit who has access and keep them locked if you can. Next. Oh, payroll. I find usually when employees are terminated or ending their employment, that a lot of people don't understand some of the fundamental obligations about payroll. For example, vacation days. If people have earned unused vacation days, you have to pay them out at the end of the year or at the end of the employee's employment. You don't have to do that with sick days, but you have to do that with vacation days. The other thing is sometimes employees leave and they owe money to a township for some reason, and you cannot withhold it no matter what they owe the township for. You can't take that back. If you paid them for a leave up front and then they haven't completed their year, you can't withhold that from payroll. So if you're in charge of administering payroll, make sure that you understand your obligations with respect to final payrolls. You also have to make sure that you're clear on overtime laws, compensatory time, benefit laws, prevailing wage. Even if you don't have employees, but you have contractors performing different public works projects for you, know what the law is with respect to prevailing wage and maintaining the documents from the contractors. And also the Fair Labor Standards Act, which are the wages and hour laws that come into place. Now, hopefully these are all defined and spelled out in your personnel policy manual, and if you don't have one, work towards that, because these laws can really get in trouble. And in Illinois, we take our labor laws very seriously, and violations of any of these usually result in severe fines and consequences. Not like, for example, if you violate the Open Meetings Act, generally you'll just get a warning about that. That doesn't happen with wage and hour laws. So make sure you're up to date on them, and that's another session I think that maybe we need to tell TOI we need to have to kind of go over those things. Questions about any of these so far? Any perspectives on?
You know, one of the comments, and listening to all this, and here again she talks about politics, which I try to get no allow no politics in the office. You know, what you do outside's fine. But we had an elected person that came in and you know, you just never know who's going to be elected. They were very strong. I don't even want to use any flattering words like dynamic or anything, but they just thought they could do anything and everything they wanted. And for me personally, it was very, very frustrating. They hire someone, then that person quits, and we went over and over what was the proper time that they were allowed, you know, because it's a union contract. And see, all this stuff is so important to cover yourself. Because we had 4 years of, and you have no clue who's going to come in. Well, maybe not, I mean. And one person can really wreck a ship. And it was very, very difficult. And as bad as it was for 4 years, now, wood. I really have it good now. Everyone gets along, and I'm not a micromanager. But it's amazing how one person or one bad employee, and you better cover your family, because all this stuff she's talking about, you have to have it to back yourself up, because if you don't, I've seen other people pay out a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money, and because we're a larger township where we're at, you know, everyone, wow, they've got tons of money, and it's just like they gravitate to you. And so all these things are so important to have in place, because you just never know. It's kind of like, I hate to even bring it up, but it's kind of like a car accident. Bam, it happens, and now you got to deal with it.
So the first thing you're all going to do when you go back is you're going to make sure you have job descriptions in place or clarification of that and cross-training. And then I have included in the materials also some organizational charts, which even if you're small, you need to have one, so you can modify these as needed. And they really, there's not a standard one for townships. They can come in all different shapes and sizes. So it just kind of depends. Now, any other tips that those of you in the audience have as to things you found really helpful as a practice within your township?
In our township, as far as the payroll and increases, we make use of our township attorney,
and you give them a raise all the time? See?
as requested. They help us set up agreeable increases, and so we do make our policies, but they are set for the 4 years of that one term. So we don't do any increases or deductions. Whatever the policy says, that's what we do for the 4 years.
Are you talking about the elected officials, or are you talking about employees?
Just employees. Employees' salaries and time off and pay.
Okay, so you set a fixed salary amount, really not related to the employee's performance? It's a fixed, like, wage increase that they would get every year? Interesting. I know, I mean,
We have 2 employees.
well, that's a good way to hear it. Then you don't have to worry about it.
They're very agreeable with it. We also take the compensation and the highway commissioner's salary and this type of thing.
Okay. Any other tips or suggestions? Any questions? Oh, sir.
Not a suggestion or a tip, just a comment. One of my functions as administrator is to coordinate between the various elected officials and make sure that all the programs that they have set in place are going correctly, and everybody knows where the money is when they have to get money for this or that function. So that's part of what I do under the administrator. And I wanted to, your first question was, who do you work for? The guy who pays you always, and that's the administrator. The supervisor's the payer.
Oh, I didn't think of
The
this.
guy that pays you, so that's who you have to work for.
So this organizational chart has the administrator, then the township board, and maybe the electors.
As a supervisor, administrator, as a blanket over everybody else, just to make sure that everything is going correctly. Every independent elected official absolutely functions on their own, but there's times when The assessor needs to know if he's got availability of a truck coming from the road commissioner for various projects or whatever, and that's what an administrator does too.
Wow, which, I think that just goes to show you how different Illinois townships can be, because I can name several administrators that if they were in the position that all of the elected officials had to go to them for everything all the time, they would not like that at all. But here it works, and you're like the middleman. So,
Yeah, well, they don't go to me, I go to them. Don't get confused. They're the elected officials. I make sure, though, that everybody coordinates everything smoothly so that all programs function well, so that no elected official is ever embarrassed. I'm a bureaucrat. They're elected officials. They gotta make sure the elected officials are not embarrassed.
very important. Yes, yes. Any other questions? Yes.
For those townships with unions, what unions are your employees members of? Is it AFSCME or is it AFSCME?
Or SEIU, and we have one that's the United Auto Workers, actually.
That's ours.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I wasn't going to implicate you, but yes. No. Oddly enough. Other, yes.
I know some townships that have an annual ordinance that they approve for compensation, not for elected officials, but for staff. Is that required?
It's not required that you do it by ordinance, but it's helpful, especially if there's anything confusing about it. Otherwise, you're fine as long as you adopt it by a motion with a written policy, attach it to your minutes, or keep it somewhere. It's a public record anyway, so it should be in writing somewhere. But there's not a legal requirement as to doing it as an ordinance, a resolution, or a motion. Other questions? Anything I forgot to say?
We don't have time. I think the session's over.
I just say one thing that works well for us at the township, we have functioning committees that the board members are a part of. Basically, they're the ones that run the committees, and so they do the work and bring it back to the committee meeting in whole, where we go through all the committee reports, and that makes things bubble up so the board can discuss it and work out any issues in budget form or whatever, and that seems to work very well. I know a lot of times townships or any organization has a hard time having functioning committees, but if you have that, that works pretty well. Even though we argue a lot, it still helps to get things up and worked on.
I just thought about something, and I know for some of you smaller townships and or the larger ones, I pride myself on getting information to the trustees. Like if you come to me and you say, hey, could we do this or blah, 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 then I gather as much information I can and I email it to all 4 trustees. And I try to get it to them because we meet every 2 weeks. And sometimes that's not good enough because they don't read it. And I got a little furious one night because I said, how am I supposed to, how can you function in your job if you don't know what's going on? And I don't know if others have that problem. Man, it just seems like it's I shouldn't say a continual thing, but I try so hard, and I'll be darned if I have hand-delivered information before. And, an ample time for them to go talk to you or you to see what you think about this issue that we're gonna have to vote on. But it's a son of a gun. And I was tempted to buy everybody a computer, and but then that doesn't matter because some of them don't want to use it. So.
Well, thank you very much. Please fill out your evaluation forms and turn them in to Mickey, or we'll be happy to fill them out for you if you want to drop them off up here. Thank you.